Go ahead and get started. We're kind of coming to the end of this study of David. In fact, what I talked with Kyle, who's doing the class in the family room right now, we're going to probably go through April, and then we'll do a switch over, and he'll be coming in here, and I'll be going to the family room. This is just kind of something that's been decided in the last couple of days. So I'll be doing David again in the family room. And this is just one of my favorite studies, is to study his life. So last week, we looked at the story of when Nathan came and confronted David about his sin against Bathsheba. And I said that intentionally because as we've been studying this story with Bathsheba, I think she's more of a victim than anything else. And part of Nathan's message to David from God was this. This is what the Lord says, out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. And so the first of many painful consequences that David experienced because of this was the death of the son that Bathsheba was carrying. But in today's passage, we're going to come to another traumatic consequence of his sin. And it begins like this. And if you want to follow along in your Bibles, we're in 2 Samuel chapter 13. And this is verse 1. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon is David's firstborn son. And he is then heir to the throne, right? His mother is Ahinoam. She was David's second wife. And in fact, we have reason to believe that she had been Saul's wife before this, which would help to explain why Nathan said this back in chapter 12 and verse 8. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. David's second son, Kileab, was the son of Abigail. And we really don't hear him mentioned in any of these stories, which leads us to think possibly he died at a younger age, or some scholars have put forth the possibility that Abigail may have been pregnant with Nabal's child when Nabal was killed. And so as a result of that, this son would not have any royal standing. So he's just not mentioned in the story. But Absalom and Tamar are full brother and sister. And they are the children of Maacah, who is the daughter of the king of Geshur. And that's going to become a part of our story in just a few minutes, okay? So we're going to cover a lot of ground this morning. Strap on your seatbelts because we're going to be flying. And I'm basically just going to tell the story of 2 Samuel chapters 13 and 14. Talk about a soap opera. This would make soap operas look tame. So Absalom fell in love with his half-sister Tamar. Let's understand the Hebrew word for love is much like our English word for love in that it has a broad range of definitions. I've said this before, but think of our English word. I love my wife, and I love Mexican food. I mean, that covers a lot, doesn't it? And it's quite possible that... Should I have done like this, Bo? Okay. So, Amnon's love here probably more means either infatuation or I would suggest it means lust. Okay? And so verse 2 says Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible. Listen to the wording. It seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Wow. So enter Amnon's cousin and friend, Jonadab. Jonadab is David's brother Shemaiah's son. So he's David's nephew. And he's described in our text as a shrewd man. He notices that Amnon's looking haggard. So he asks him, what's going on? And Amnon shares with him these feelings that he's having for his half-sister. And so Jonadab devises a plan. As I said, he's shrewd. And chapter 3 and 13 and verse 5 says, go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight so that I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. Okay, do you see any red flags here? Well, sadly, David didn't. He seems awfully gullible here. I mean, surely, in all the kingdom of Israel, who would have a better kitchen staff than David would? Right? So why would he want his half-sister to come to his bedroom to prepare a meal for him? It doesn't say. It doesn't say. But did David really think anything good's going to come out of this? So Tamar comes, she begins making the preparations, and I have to wonder, and I'm obviously, I don't think like a female, but I can't help but wonder what's going through her mind in all of this. Well, David had gotten her this far, and now everyone present is under Amnon's authority. So Amnon orders everyone to vacate the room. Who's going to argue with him? And so that's what they do. Surely Tamar has to be feeling very uncomfortable in this situation. But she's there, why? Dad told her to go. So when Tamar brings him the food to his bedside, he grabs her. And he tries to force himself on her, but she resists. She tries to reason with him. She tells him this is a violation of the law. And she then adds, and this will disgrace me publicly. And then she adds, this is going to be a real embarrassment to you. And when it seems as if she's making no progress here, she then says, how about talk to Dad and maybe he'll allow us to get married? Which I think all this is a stalling tactic on her part. But Amnon, he's not listening. And he's stronger than she is. And so he overpowers her and he rapes her. And this whole incident just didn't play out the way Absalom had it pictured in his mind that it was going to play out. Because Tamar had been unwilling in this whole thing. And so this act of violence, it has nothing to do with love. And so his love immediately becomes revulsion. He can't stand the sight of this person that he has violated. And plus, he's probably doing some transference here. He is probably transferring his loathing that he's feeling about himself or what he's done onto her. It's a form of projection, as we talked about last week, when David projected the judgment against the man in Nathan's story from himself, okay? So he says to her, get out of here. But she resists. She resists because she says that casting her off is even more evil than him raping her. Why? Well, he's placing her in a position in that culture to where no man's ever going to want to have her now. And this just seems to repulse Amnon even more. He has his servants throw her out and lock the door. And so she leaves the house. She tears the robe she has on, a robe that virgin daughters of kings would wear. And she is in tears. And she places ashes on her head as a mark of mourning. And she goes out weeping. And I can't help but wonder if anyone saw her. Because if they saw her leaving his house in this condition, they may not know exactly what happened, but they would know something really bad happened. Would you agree? So, when Tamar's full brother Absalom hears about what's happened, here's what he says. Be quiet for now, my sister. He's your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. Easier said than done, right? But he seems to be telling her here that this is something just to keep in the family. And perhaps then to ensure that silence is kept, as well as to help her get over the trauma, he has her move into his house with him. And he never tells her what his intentions are in this whole thing. But he has intentions. In fact, from what Jonadab's going to tell David 2 years later, if you look over at chapter 13 and verse 32, Jonadab says that from the time that Amnon raped Tamar, Absalom has a plan. And then, man, this verse, if we could unpack this, I want you to hear these sad words at the end of verse 20. And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. It would be hard to calculate everything that Amnon stole from her that day. He stole her life. And so what's David's response when he hears about all of this? When King David heard all this, he was furious. And Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister, Absalom. So it appears as if David did nothing. Now, there's some early manuscripts that actually add a sentence here to verse 21 that says this: but he did not curb the excesses of his son Amnon. He favored him because he was his firstborn. And so the king's son, heir to the throne, can get away with rape and incest. Why did David choose to do nothing? I can think of two possibilities. One would be that he would be fearful of being hypocritical. I mean, after his past, what can he say? What can he speak into this? But I think another possibility is that maybe he felt partly responsible for the whole thing, because why was she even there? Because he had sent her there. And so David throws a fit, but he doesn't do anything about it. But Absalom, man, this dude is calm and cool on the outside. He is the essence of self-control. And he conceals his anger, and he acts as if nothing's happened. But in his heart, he's already decided Amnon's going to pay for this. So he has the motive. All he needs now is the means and opportunity. And it comes 2 years later. 2 years pass. Seems as if everything's been forgotten. And it's sheep shearing time. And sheep shearing time, what's that mean in that culture? Celebration, festival, party. So, well, it's work too, but the reward for the work is the festival. And here is the pretext that Absalom's been waiting for. And so he arranges for a huge party at his ranch that's 17, 18 miles away to the north from Jerusalem. And he invites David to come. But if you read the entire text, you get the feeling from reading it that he invites David to come, but he's really not wanting David to come. And he knows when he invites David to come that he probably won't. Because David has to have an entourage to do anything. I mean, imagine a president today. I mean, you don't just, president doesn't just say, hey, I'll be over for dinner tonight. And so he has this entourage that he would bring, and it would mean it was a major undertaking. Plus, the sheer numbers of people that would have to come, it wouldn't be easily accommodated. So David declines the invitation, but he gives a blessing to Absalom throwing the party. And it's at this point that Absalom requests from David what he really wanted to begin with. He says, well, then how about let Amnon come in your place? And David kind of pushes back against that a little bit, but Absalom's insistent, and so David gives in. And not only does he send Amnon, he sends all of his sons to the party. Well, it's at this point that Absalom gives his servants their instructions. He says, listen, when Amnon's in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Haven't I given you this order? Be strong and brave. So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. Then all the king's sons got up, mounted their mules, and fled. So just as David had instructed Joab to kill Uriah, Absalom now instructs his men to kill Amnon. And this not only avenges his sister, what else does this do? Absalom's now first in succession to the throne. So with the crown prince now lying dead, these other brothers, they hop on their mules and they hightail it back to Jerusalem. They get out of Dodge and they do it quickly. Because for all they know, hey, Absalom may be wanting to kill them too. And they're not going to hang around to find out. But before they arrive back in Jerusalem, somebody else has already beaten them back. And this messenger tells David, we were there at the party and all of your sons were killed. There's not one of them left alive. Well, how do you think David felt when he got that news? Think he felt something like Job? When Job was told that all of his children, sons and daughters, had been killed in a tornado? So he tears his clothes. He lays prostrate on the ground. And all his servants tore their clothes as well. They're all in mourning over this. But then shrewd Jonadab appears again. And he comes to David and he says, David, listen, the story you got wasn't completely accurate. All of your sons aren't dead. Only one of them, Amnon, is dead. Which immediately I'm going, how did he know that? He wasn't at the party. How did he know that? Because he knew what Absalom's intentions were. I'm telling you, this guy Jonadab, he appears to be an opportunist with no scruples. He must have had some idea that Amnon's intentions with Tamar were not the best. But he didn't stop him. In fact, he helped him set the trap. And now he knows Absalom's plan, but he doesn't do anything to stop him. Maybe he had a shrewd reason for telling David that only Amnon was killed. In fact, let's look at what happens after the sons arrive. Jonadab said to the king, "See, the king's sons have come. It has happened just as your servant said." What would you call this today? Making points? Maybe if he is convinced that I'm a good advisor, I can get into the inner circle. So, when the sons arrive back in Jerusalem, they grieve. And David joins them in that grief. And they mourn for many days. Meanwhile, Absalom is fleeing north to Geshur, which is on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. Remember, Geshur's where his mother was born. Granddad is the king of Geshur. And so Absalom's fleeing to seek asylum with his relatives. Chapter 13 and verse 39 says, after Absalom fled and went to Geshur, he stayed there 3 years. Okay. Enter Joab. Who is Joab? Yeah, I often refer to him as the Secretary of Defense. He's David's head military guy. And Joab knows if there's ever going to be a clean succession take place in Israel when David is gone, we need to have that in place. So, man, Absalom, we need to get this thing rectified. And so he devises a plan to get them reconciled. He sends for a woman from Tekoa, which is about 10 miles from Jerusalem. And he tells her to dress like a widow who's been in mourning and to ask for an audience with the king to plead for justice. She's to explain that she has 2 sons, and they got into a fight, and one son killed the other son. And her clan is demanding that murderer, that son, be put to death. But here's the dilemma. If that son is put to death, she says, then I don't have anyone to take care of me. I will be destitute. So, the story is carefully devised to gain David's sympathy. After all, she's in mourning for a son. He's in mourning for a son. And after some exchange takes place here, almost like bartering, he then assures her that he will protect their son. In fact, this is how he puts it. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground. Well, now's the time for her to spring the trap. And she says, why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not convict himself? For the king has not brought back his banished son, like water spilled on the ground which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But that is not what God desires. Rather, he devises ways so that a banished person does not remain banished from him. David puts 2 and 2 together. And he realizes this whole conversation isn't about her. This is about me and my son. And he thinks, this is the kind of thing Joab would have come up with. So he asks her, did Joab put you up to this? She said, yes. And apparently Joab, maybe he's in the same room. Because then it immediately says, the king said to Joab, very well, I'll go do it. I'll do it. Go, bring back the young man Absalom. But he has a qualifier. In verse 24, he says, he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. And so Absalom comes home from Geshur, a free man, essentially pardoned for murdering the crown prince. But it's obvious to everyone in the kingdom that he's out of favor with the king, with his dad. He's home from exile, but this stalemate continues for 2 more years. And at this point, then, our author paints an appealing picture of Absalom. I think the author does this so that we have a better understanding for why people begin to like Absalom and begin to shift their loyalties from David to Absalom. It says, in all Israel there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut his hair once a year because it became too heavy for him. I have that same problem, by the way. He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels, which is 5 pounds. 5 pounds of hair by the royal standard. 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. His daughter's name was Tamar. He names his daughter after his sister who has been violated. And she became a beautiful woman. So he's extremely handsome. He looks so kingly. He has 3 sons, which would suggest what? Continuing succession would be in line. He seems the perfect choice now to be David's successor. But there's still one problem. What's the problem? He's out of favor with the king. So after 2 years of house arrest, Absalom's had it. Since he can't leave his house, he summons Joab to come to him because he wants to talk to him about something. And Joab snubs him. He ignores him. He sends another request. He's snubbed again. After the second request, he does what any one of us would do if we had been snubbed by somebody. He has people go and burn his barley field. Now, Joab doesn't take long now getting to him because he wants to confront him about what he's done. But when Joab gets there, who's doing the confronting? It's Absalom. Absalom confronts Joab. He says, I could have just stayed up there in Geshur. At least in Geshur, I could leave the house. I can't do anything here. And then he says something that is really troubling to me. Because most of the time, particularly with David, we're comforted by the fact that he sees when he's done wrong and he owns up to it. But listen to what Absalom says right here. If I am guilty of anything, let him put me to death. Absalom, are you actually suggesting that you might not be guilty of something here? Realize he, without any court or anything, he automatically assumed that Amnon deserved the death penalty. But what did the law say about what Amnon had done? Anyone know? Death penalty wasn't attached to rape, but restitution was. That's what Amnon should have done. He should have had to pay him back 4 times, or pay 4 times over. What would the law say about what Absalom did? Death penalty. He thinks it was appropriate for his brother, but not for him. And this troubles me. Well, Joab relays Absalom's request to David. And verse 33, he comes to David. David receives him, and it says in verse 33, and the king kissed Absalom. This is more than just a passing thing. This has significance to it. What would that convey? Acceptance. He's giving him his full position back. Okay? Okay. I went through that quicker than I thought I would. We have 10 minutes left, but I do have a little bit more that I want to ask you to enter into the discussion now. How do you feel about the way this story ends? Now, I'm going to give you some options to choose from, or maybe you have something else. First option is that David is forgiving as he should have been. Second is David ignores justice. Third is it's sad that Absalom had to beg to begin with. Fourth is the reconciliation has occurred. And fifth is, I didn't put number 5 there, this isn't over. So, let's talk about it. What do you think? Mike goes for 2 and 4. David ignores justice, and true reconciliation has occurred. 2 and 5. David ignores justice, and this isn't over. Who said all the above? All the above. Okay. It's sad that Absalom had to beg. He didn't ever get a chance. Well, no, that's not true. I hear you. Hey, none of these are necessarily wrong, by the way. This is just to kind of stir up some discussion. Roxy. So David's negligence as a father is setting the precedent for downstream when Absalom does what he does to David. He's reminded every day when he comes home, isn't he? There is no doubt Absalom gets to the point where he abhors the thought of his father. He tries what? So Absalom tries to avenge his sister. He takes and that may be why he even did it, because his father didn't do anything. We don't know that. Yeah. Okay. So Roxy's saying she kind of, up to this point in the story, she would somewhat side with Absalom in this story. Kind of gets why he did what he did. And I think there's something in all of us that says, hey, someone rapes one of my family members, this isn't stopping here. To David's what? Well, and I think that's kind of what Roxy was saying. Yeah, so add on to that. It all goes, this is off of David's plate. Yeah. He's a great manager of the kingdom. He's not a great manager of his family. Okay? I think that's a strong possibility. As I shared earlier in our study, I've known of a family that Beverly and I were working with that the father had an affair, and then later his daughter had an affair, and we were talking, trying to help them through that, and he was very resistant to getting involved in that with her because he said, I don't have a voice. What can I say here? So, very possibly, yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. And think of we still have this somewhat in our culture, but not nearly as bad as it once was. But the shame that is heaped on her for something she had nothing, I mean, this was not her choice. And her life is destroyed. You know, they didn't have PTS therapy and stuff back then. So she's just stuck here. And it's a tragic story. Randy, I saw your hand go up. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. And I agree with that, and I agree what Roxy said. Here's my only sticking point on this is mercy and forgiveness does not mean that there are no consequences attached. And there were no consequences attached here. That's what troubles me about the story. Which is what Nathan, through God, said was going to happen. Yes, this is all coming out of what Nathan said was going to happen. Right. Yep. True. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. 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 That's good. It's a circular story. Yeah. True. Somebody, did I hear? Denver. And then we'll close after this. Yeah. Right.